Duncan the Stubborn Engine has worked on the Skarloey Railway for many years. He's a Barclay 040 narrow gauge tank engine of Scottish descent and is the fictional counterpart to the real life Douglas of the Talyllyn Railway in Wales. Duncan is well known for his grumbling, doing things his own way, not listening to advice, but also his moments of sympathy and humility. Duncan has always been an absolute favourite of mine. Not only is he my favourite narrow gauge engine, but he has also fared pretty well in all three eras. Yes, even he ain't immune to character regression, and he also isn't devoid of bad episodes either, but when a Duncan episode is great, boy is it great. But before we get to that, let's start his journey off with the Railway series. In 1958, a huge disaster occurred on the Skarloey Railway. Sir Handel has always been rough with the trucks, and one day they've decided to put an end to it and pay him out. Their plan was to purposefully break the incline, which would result into a full-speed head-on collision with the engine at the bottom. To the trucks' horror, the engine that was waiting for them was not Sir Handel, but Peter Sam, who took the brunt of their trick.
They began to move. Faster, faster, they grumbled. They reached halfway, gathering speed. Scrag him, they yelled. No, no, wailed the empty trucks. It's Peter Sam, it's Peter Sam. But it was no use. The loaded trucks were straining at the rope. They broke it with a crack.
Due to the engines all being the same colour in the Railway series, the trucks at the top of the incline weren't able to tell Peter Sam apart from Sir Handel, but the damage was already done.
Ouch! He shivered. I didn't expect a cold bath.
Peter Sam was put out of commission and the railway had purchased a new engine. Duncan, a grumpy, easily agitated, short-tempered, industrial well tank engine from Scotland has arrived to take over. He meant well and always got the job done, but he could definitely use a few tweaks to his attitude.
What's that about me? I'm a plain engine and believe in plain speaking. Speak up and stop whispering in corners. He grunted. I know my way about, thank you. I don't need smelly diesels to tell me what to do.
He, like many steam engines, took a disliking to diesels due to the scrapping of steam engines over in the UK becoming the norm by 1958. However, he eventually warmed up to Rusty after his infamous rock and roll incident.
Rusty, he whispered that night, thank you for helping. I'm sorry I was rude. That's all right. I wish all diesels were like you. Let's be friends. Suits me, smiled Rusty. We'll mend that bad bit first thing tomorrow.
All of that happens in the same story, and Duncan never complains about diesels again. The fact that Duncan got over his prejudice towards diesels in only one story is kinda amazing. It really shows that while change is hard for him, it isn't impossible. Not only that, but Duncan himself decided to apologize and to put things right. No one reprimanded him or told him to say sorry, it was purely Duncan himself. In his next story, called Passengers and Polish, we get introduced to his jealous side of his character and learn that when Duncan feels mistreated, he gets pouty and refuses to work. He purposefully stops on the viaduct, which results into Skarloey coming to the rescue to bring the passengers home. This time, however, Duncan is rightfully reprimanded. In the very next story, Skalloey tells Duncan about Rheneas and how he once saved the entire railway from closing down. Only because of Rheneas' bravery did the passengers decide to stick to traveling by rail, and Duncan realizes that passengers are important after all. While Wilbur didn't do anything more with him, his son Christopher came along and decided to write one final story about Duncan called Pop Special. In this one, Duncan learns about a Boy Scout who is doing voluntary work to aid the railway. The hot weather makes the boys thirsty, but as it turns out, the refreshment lady is all out of soda. But Duncan remembers a place where they can still get some. He quickly rushes to the tea shop and delivers it to the Boy Scout as a return to the hard work the Boy Scout does for them.
"It's nothing," he said modestly. "You're helping us. It's only fair we should help you, too."
While there is nothing really wrong with the story, it also ain't anything special either, though I do appreciate that Chris was consistent with Duncan's character growth and didn't turn him back into a selfish grump. Unfortunately, that's pretty much it when it comes to Duncan's appearances in the Railway series. He does appear in other stories of course, but he doesn't do anything significant, but that's alright. I'm just glad to see that he grew so much as a character in only 4 stories. Though Duncan hasn't appeared a terrible lot in the Railway series, the TV series saw the potential with his character and really went all out with him. Duncan's introduction in the TV series was no different from the books. He had a disdain for Rusty and was often rude towards the people around him, including Sir Topham Hatt.
No passengers means no polish.
And no polish means no passengers, Duncan muttered to himself. He still has a lot to learn, doesn't he?
While his episodes in the 4th series play out exactly as they do in the Railway series, Duncan gained his first TV exclusive episode in season 5. Duncan Gets Spooked is a legendary episode that needs no introduction. Everyone knows it, everyone adores it. This episode is reminiscent of the episode Ghosts from Thomas's sister series, Tugs. Both are very similar in tone and leave the viewers to draw their own conclusions on what happened. Are ghosts real in this universe, or are the characters just seeing things? The beauty of ambiguity makes it possible for the viewers to speculate for decades to come, and I love it. The fact that stories about anthropomorphic characters drowning on screen were greenlit 26 years ago really shows how times have changed. Not only is the episode fantastic in terms of tone and story, but every other aspect that makes up the episode is also at peak level throughout. The narrators for one brought out their A-game during their recording sessions. Both Michael Angelis and Alec Baldwin absolutely killed it this season.
Fancy not securing your freight cars on a hill? They'll come back to spook you and your special funnel. Woo!
Pah! Ghosts. Things are go bump in the night. Rubbish.
The mists were rising around the old iron bridge. Duncan whistled, and the sound echoed everywhere.
It's the ghost. Take me back, please. Spooked are you, Duncan? Laughed his driver. No, well, Duncan, I'm asleep.
The visuals too are breathtakingly gorgeous. Not only are the mist and the firefly effect really well made, but the atmosphere during the nighttime is so eerie, and the portrayal of isolation is beautifully captured. The set design too is absolutely stunning. I love the set of the old Iron Bridge. I absolutely get why one would feel uneasy to cross over an unprotected bridge this high up. And of course, the music. Mike and Junior are no strangers when it comes to creepy music, and yet they completely outdid themselves here. This music still sends shivers down the spine almost 3 decades later. All of those aspects come together so perfectly to craft one of the most legendary episodes in TV history. Duncan Gets Spooked truly is a timeless classic, and I'm sure that many people will not only agree that this is the scariest episode of the franchise, but also Duncan's best episode of the whole series. Season 6 was another great year for Duncan, being the lead of 2 episodes this time around. The first one is Duncan, which is another classic that everybody remembers. I like how this episode shows us that no matter how hard the engines try to reason with Duncan, he always finds a way to cause trouble. Duncan truly is a hard engine to tame. I love how his impatience and recklessness are shown at full display here. Not only is the episode incredibly entertaining, but it also features one of the most craziest crashes in the entire show.
It suddenly snapped. Help! He yelled.
I have no idea how this guy is still in one piece.
Glug, 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 he said. Bluggle, my broiler. Duncan felt foolish and very wet.
This is also the last time that steam engines are referred to as steamers rather than steamies, as well as the first time in which Sir Topham Hatt says his famous catchphrase,
Your impatience has caused confusion and delay. I'll show that smelly diesel and those lazy steamers.
40 Whistles is also an incredibly entertaining watch. It's so funny how Duncan tries to piss everybody off just because, only to get his comeuppance. He knows that he has no right to complain this time because it was entirely his own doing. Peter Sam, as always, is also just really adorable.
You really did well to deliver your goods without a whistle, he said. Do you think so? Said Duncan, cheering up a bit. Absolutely, said Peter Sam, even though an engine's not an engine without a whistle. Or an organ, chuckled the headmaster. And all the engines tooted back, except Duncan, who just grinned.
This episode's plot is based on a railway series story, Mike's Whistle. However, the episode differs quite a bit from the original story, which makes 40 Whistles feel like a completely different thing entirely. But 14 years later, we ended up receiving a proper adaptation of the story after all with season 20. Duncan truly carried for the narrow gauge episodes in season 6, didn't he? Not to mention, Duncan's large-scale model has been severely upgraded this year, receiving an entirely new one built from scratch, which replaced the model previously used in season 5. Not only that, but he has also received a new coat of ochre paint, which is in stark contrast to his bright yellow paint job he has been given for the TV series to differentiate the Skarloey engines. I find it kinda insane in retrospect that the show crew even bothered to redo Duncan's model in the first place, which on the one hand I'm glad they did because I really liked the season 6 model, but this also meant that poor Sir Handel had been neglected once again.
Sir Handel had been naughty.
And guess what? Duncan got another pair of lead roles in a consecutive season. The first one is called The Runaway Elephant, which again is another exhilarating episode featuring a banger score and great narrations for both sides of the Atlantic. Yes, both Michaels didn't have the best year with season 7, but fortunately they both absolutely delivered in this episode.
Look out! Shouted his driver.
Slow down, whistled Rusty. I can't! Duncan cried as he shot past.
Nonsense, huffed Duncan to his driver. I've pushed heavier loads than this plenty of times.
Let's go, Duncan, said his driver. But we must be careful.
Hooray for Duncan's mistake, cheered the engines.
The composers, Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell in the UK dub and Robert Hartshorne in the US dub respectively, both composed banger runaway scores. I also like the gag that Duncan's driver is just as rash and stupid as Duncan himself. Overall, a great episode, but alas, the same can't be said for his other lead role. Trusty Rusty is one of many examples of regressed characterization and retconning past events to make a new story work.
Rusty, he whispered. Thank you for helping. I'm sorry I was rude to you. That's all right, Duncan. I wish all diesels were like you. Let's be friends.
How would you know? Wheesh, Duncan. You're only a diesel.
Not a fan at all. Something that also bothered me in this episode is that Duncan apparently ran out of coal and yet his bunkers are shown to be full. How did no one notice that? This time it's Rusty who carried this episode, being portrayed in line with his previous episodes. Though it's kinda disappointing that only he and Peter Sam were the only narrow gauge engines to be portrayed 100% accurately throughout season 7. I ought to mention that I don't find this episode to be terrible by any means, and Duncan isn't fully out of character either. Him disobeying the rules and going over the old wooden bridge is something he'd absolutely do, and he is sincerely apologetic by the end. But I just can't defend the lazy writer's retcon. But overall, it's still a decent episode, despite that glaring inconsistency. From season 6 onwards, Duncan's character has been slightly reinvented as an adventurous risk-taker rather than a selfish grump who gets pouty when things don't go his way, though some of his old character traits still remained, such as him not thinking about his actions and the consequences that will follow. A very welcome change if you ask me. It definitely fits him and is also the portrayal that the later hit seasons focused on the most. Duncan, as well as the other narrow gauge engines, was absent for a while, which makes season 8 the first season to not feature the Sculloy engine since their introduction in the 4th series. Fortunately, Hit saw the potential in making the narrow gauge engines consistent B characters moving forward, and thus the narrow gauge railway reappeared in season 9 and was a mainstay for the remainder of the model series. But unfortunately, Hit didn't bother to do any research on what type of character the Sculloy engines were meant to be, and therefore pretty much all of them were completely bastardized and unlike their previous portrayals. Rheneas and Sculloy were already on shaky ground in season 7, but from season 9 onwards, both characters were completely destroyed and turned into completely brain-dead imbeciles instead of a reliable and experienced duo. Rusty too was turned into a cretin, being portrayed as irresponsible and prone to rushing. Sir Handel meanwhile suddenly turned into a wise and experienced old man who's respected by the other engines.
He knows a lot of things, and sometimes he can be rather grand. He enjoys telling the other engines what to do, and because he is a wise engine, the other engines do as he tells them.
What the fuck is this? And Peter Sam was okay. He didn't do a whole lot in the Hit era, and I can't say that I like his portrayal as a Debbie Downer either, but at the very least it's fair to say that he was the least inaccurate of engines 1 to 5. He actively insulted the tail of Proteus in the Magic Lamp, though he eventually learned to respect the tail and went out of his way to honor him in the episode Mountain Marvel. Neither of his episodes were great, but I do appreciate the solid continuity between them, and at the very least, neither of them were terrible or near the worst of either season. Duncan, meanwhile, got the long end of the stick, and his episodes tended to be the saving grace of the narrow gauge episodes, for the most part. He too isn't void of dumb episodes, and there are the occasional decent ones that don't feature him as the lead, but 3 of Duncan's episodes are some of the best of the entire hit era. One of those episodes is called Duncan and the Old Mine, which is a fun Duncan adventure type of story, and I really like it. It definitely helps that both he and Rusty are in character. Duncan is looking forward to taking holidaymakers to Coldy Caves, but when he arrives at the transfer yards, he discovers that plans have changed last minute and is tasked to haul coal trucks instead. Duncan still desires an adventure and gets his chance when he finds an entrance to an old disused mine. But upon his entry, he knocks down a support beam which causes a load of debris to block the entrance. Duncan tries to find his way out, but when he rams into a set of buffers, he is convinced that he's reached a dead end. But to his fortune, it turns out that he didn't ram into a set of buffers after all, but a line of trucks which he uses to push through the other entrance. Like many Duncan episodes, this one is really fun. I love how Duncan tries to have an adventure by all means. I like how he ignores Rusty without being out of character. I like how Rusty still worries about Duncan regardless, and the feeling of isolation and claustrophobia is wonderfully captured. Really impressive model work in this one, and just a really fun episode in general. Another top 5 of season 9 for me. He also had minor roles in the episodes The Magic Lamp and Skallowy the Brave. I like how enthusiastic Duncan is about the story of Proteus, which makes sense considering his encounter all the way back in season 5. The fact that Duncan is so fascinated despite his trauma is kinda bittersweet. Unfortunately, he too had one moment in which he was portrayed as a cretin. In Skallowy the Brave, Duncan and Rhaenyra see Skallowy being pulled up by the incline and say this.
Look at where Skarloey is, puffed Rhaenyra. That is the bravest thing to do, chuffed Duncan.
Why are you saying that, Duncan? Do you not remember what happened last time when you were the one being pulled up by the incline? Was the impact so hard that you forgot? But honestly, this episode sucks so hard it doesn't matter. Everybody is just so stupid in this one. Season 10 was another good year for Duncan, being the lead of 2 episodes this time around. But alas, his first lead episode, called Duncan Drops a Clanger, is kinda boring. Nothing really happens and the engines are all just goofing around light engine. Like, why do you guys not have any jobs to do? Where are your trains? Why is no one pulling any rolling stock? However, Duncan's bluff is the exact opposite. This episode is absolutely fantastic, featuring each railway's most competitive loudmouths clashing and trying to shove their own superiority into the other's face. A very entertaining episode, and I would like to retract a statement by myself from the past and claim this as my possible favourite from season 10. While Michael Angelis is the indisputable king when it comes to voicing James, I appreciate how Brandon makes him sound like he's out of breath in his dub.
I'll soon be back with so much coal, puffed James. It will take you all winter to deliver it.
Both Michaels do a fantastic job as Duncan in their narrations, Brandon especially.
Now James will think I've delivered all the coal. Duncan chuffed cheerfully.
I love that evil laugh he added, which is exclusive to his dub. Michael Brandon really seemed to become a lot better from season 10 onwards, didn't he? But Angelus too deserves props for doing a good job himself. I enjoyed listening to both Michael's dub for this episode, and I really like how each has a different take on Duncan's performance. Brandon portrays him as a bragging loudmouth, whereas Angelus makes him sound more like a douchey snob.
You still haven't brought enough coal, teased Duncan. I thought you were supposed to be really useful.
You still haven't brought enough coal, teased Duncan. I thought you were supposed to be really useful.
And here we have another year with 2 Duncan leads. Cool Truckings is easily a top 5 of the entire hit era for me. Not only are the concept and the character pairing completely unique, but the execution is also second to none. I absolutely love this episode. It's a fun ride full of ups and downs. All the characters are absolutely perfect in this one. I love how Thomas and Peregrine are worried because they know that snow means trouble. They don't care about being on time, they only care about Madge and Duncan's safety. As you all know, Madge is my favorite hit era newbie simply because she's really entertaining. A fun grandma type of character who looks out for the other engines and tries to appease their needs. She ain't stupid or anything, she's just trying to get her jobs done reliably, but that won't hinder her from having a little fun, which ends up coming back to bite her.
They crashed through a snowbank. But my boiler, cried Duncan.
Bloody hell, this is terrifying. This episode immediately turns from goofing around on the road to a near-death experience. The matter is treated 100% seriously. But in typical Duncan fashion, he immediately wants to continue having fun right after escaping death by a narrow margin.
We're late, called Madge. I have to get you to the transfer yards to help Thomas. Duncan was disappointed, but he knew Madge was right. He had work to do.
I am thankful that the scene where Madge and Duncan are reprimanded was omitted. Both have very clearly learned their lesson and know to be more careful from now on. In fact, this is the last time ever in which Duncan has been shown to be this reckless, which means that his character growth he'd gained from this episode was apparently meant to stick. I also wanted to mention that I really like how Thomas is characterized. Instead of endlessly complaining about being delayed, he's just thankful that Duncan arrived safely, which is in stark contrast to his early years.
If we hurried across the viaduct, it might collapse, and then you'd have no passengers at all. What would you do then? Run my train on time for one thing, retorted Thomas.
Thank you, Duncan, tooted Thomas. Good job.
Duncan Does It All is only a very mediocre episode. There's nothing terribly wrong with this one, as in none of the characters are out of character, but simultaneously there's just not a lot going on. Duncan is tired of delivering straw all day, which results into him asking the other engines to do their jobs instead. He doesn't do their jobs properly, however, and finds out later that the other engines got into trouble for his ruthlessness. Not a great episode or anything, but definitely better than Duncan drops a clanker. However, I do like that Duncan owns up to his mistake by himself. He could have just let Rusty and Sculloy take the blame for it, but he didn't. He knows that it's his fault for not doing their jobs properly and apologizes. Duncan may be disobedient, rash, quick to anger, and prone to rushing, but he's not heartless. Whenever he messes up, he makes sure to apologize and to put things right. And here we have Duncan's worst year of the entire series. Duncan and the hot air balloon is not only Duncan's worst episode, but also one of the worst of the entire model era. Why the fuck does Mr. Percival want Duncan to deliver a hot air balloon on a flatbed? Of course Duncan is gonna make this thing fly off. What do you expect, you retard? Why can't the balloon man just fly to the Percival house and the job is done? That's typical season 12 logic for you. I really can't stand this one. Just what on earth were they thinking when writing this one? A horrible way to send Duncan off in the model series. It's crazy to think that Duncan, of all characters, managed to gain a lead role in every model season he appeared in. Not only that, but he also had multiple episode leads per season more often than not. It really shows that he's a character with a lot going on. Now let's head on over and check how the CGI era handled him. Despite the narrow gauge engines not appearing for a good few years after the switch to CGI, they have been mentioned by Thomas in the first ever CGI special, Hero of the Rails.
Do you like stories, Thomas?
Yes, the little engines in the hills tell me stories all the time.
Not only that, but they've also been mentioned in the episode Steamy Sodor.
Hurry, Victor, you'll be late for the little engines.
And not to mention the Mid-Sodor trio cameo in a storyboard for Kevin the Steamy. I actually really like this. While everything has to be remade from the ground up due to the new medium, it still tries to abide by past events and remembers past characters who haven't made the switch to CGI yet. Their long hiatus finally came to an end in 2012 with the release of Blue Mountain Mystery. My jaw dropped. I still remember how hyped I was when this film was brand new and it was announced that the narrow gauge engines are coming back, which was a whopping 12 years ago. Not only did engines 1 to 5 return, but they've looked better than they ever have before. All renders have been designed to be as accurate as possible to the real life counterparts on the Talleyrand Railway. Duncan, however, got the short end of the stick and didn't return along with the others. The reason for that is quite simple. Douglas was undergoing an overhaul and therefore the crew weren't able to measure him, and since Nitrogen were destined to recreate the engines faithfully, they had to ditch him entirely. Now, I'm sure that Duncan wouldn't have contributed much in the final film anyway, and the story works just fine without him, but in a perfect world, the post-credit scene would have featured him coming out of the steamworks instead of Rheneas. Freddy too was going to reappear with Bob Golding as his voice actor, but the exact reason why he got ditched is unknown. Despite Duncan not appearing physically, he was still remembered by the show crew and was mentioned by Rheneas in the season 16 episode Don't Bother Victor.
Duncan's rods are rattling. He needs Victor.
I still remember when this episode was brand new and Duncan was mentioned in it. It made my hopes high up for a possible future comeback, which finally ended up paying off in 2014. It seemed like Ark and Mattel wanted to make up for Duncan's absence in the CGI series thus far and decided to give him 2 episodes for season 18, both of which are one of the best that he'd ever gotten, which doesn't say a lot considering that most of his episodes are bangers, but it's still very much appreciated. However, it was immediately apparent that Duncan was designed by an entirely different animation company compared to the other narrow gauge engines. His render was drastically altered and neither resembles him as his model series nor his real life counterpart. They also gave him a cleft chin for some reason and also decided to revert back to the season 4 and 5 shade of yellow, which is interesting. While his CGI render is definitely improvable to say the least, his 2 episodes on the other hand are the exact opposite and are easily some of the best of not only the CGI series but the entire show in general. Let's begin with Duncan and the Grumpy Passenger. In this one, Duncan is confronted with a grouchy old man who likes to complain about whatever minor inconvenience that occurs to him. Duncan has finally come in contact with someone who is even grouchier than himself. No matter how hard Duncan tries to appease him, the passenger never stops bitching. He tries to go at the right pace, he tries to couple up extra coaches to give the passengers more room, he speeds through a section that is under repair, and he even waits for him even though he overslept, which results into everybody else becoming grumpy. And yet, nothing changes, but he knows that despite having good intentions, what he did wasn't the right thing to do. And without a second thought, without any hesitation, he immediately apologizes to Mr. Percival when he gets the chance to do so.
Sir, I know what you're going to say, and I'm truly sorry.
Thank you for saying so, Duncan. But why did you take Skarloey's coaches and speed through the railworks and ignore the guard's whistle?
Because of that grumpy passenger, sir. I was trying to stop him complaining.
Duncan, I know that passenger well. He's always grumpy, and he always finds something to complain about. But today, you made everybody grumpy.
Again, Duncan is perfectly capable of realizing his own mistake and owns up to it, trying his best to do better next time, which he does. He simply ignores that obnoxious asshole and ends up having a much better day as a result of that. Duncan is such a mood in this one and very relatable too. Tom Staunton did a great job and was a flawless choice as his VA. I'm glad that none of the usual cast members were given the role because it makes Thomas's grandiose performance stand out wonderfully. I also just really love the moral of the story. No matter how hard you try, sometimes you just can't change something, so it's best to ignore it. You can't change how other people around you act, but you can decide how to deal with it. I also ought to talk about the ending. It's purposefully left vague and up to the viewer's interpretation to decide if Duncan is going to change his grumpy behaviour once and for all.
Today, I learnt a very important lesson. I'm going to change my ways and be a different engine from now on. Just you wait and see.
Really? You mean you're going to stop grumbling once and for all?
No, I mean I'm going to stop listening to that grumpy old passenger and just get on with being really useful.
But if Duncan ultimately changes is something we'll have to wait and see until the next story. An absolutely incredible episode and one of Davy Moore's magnum opuses.
Why do people always think it's me who's always grumbling? I mean, I've never grumbled in my life. Me grumbling? Don't think so.
And now we finally reach the grand finale. Duncan the Humbug. The be-all end-all to Duncan's character journey. I've already talked about this one in detail in the latest video, so I won't be able to bring anything new to the table. But still, this episode deserves to be talked about for bringing a marvelous character arc to a satisfying conclusion. Duncan isn't a fan of the winter holiday seasons. He can't stand the annoying carols, he hates skidding on icy rails, and he despises the seasonal decorations.
With all the work I have to do, picking up extra passengers, remembering the new seasonal timetable, waiting around in the bitter cold, getting bugs in my face...
If we could only find a way to stop Duncan complaining all the time.
Or even just for one day.
As it turns out, his opinions are rather unpopular amongst the narrow gauge engines, and just to have him stop complaining for one day, Mr. Percival strikes a deal with him. If Duncan manages to not lose his shit for the entire day, he'll receive a fresh coat of paint. Duncan is eager to win the wager, but he quickly realizes that changing his whole persona is much harder than anticipated. Every time he manages to recompose himself, but he eventually loses it when Luke is struggling to climb a hill. Duncan immediately feels sorry for pissing on poor Luke and successfully manages to help him. His efforts didn't go unappreciated either, and he's subsequently rewarded with a fresh coat of paint.
You deserve a special treat.
You mean a new coat of paint?
That's right, Duncan.
Thank you, sir. That's very kind. From now on, I will try and be more cheerful, sir. At least some of the time.
Very good, Duncan. But I think I might have been wrong to ask you to be cheerful all day.
You do grumble a lot, but that's just the way you are.
And it doesn't make you any less useful.
The ending truly feels like Duncan has finally changed for good. He's so sincere and I love it. He'll never fully stop complaining, but he doesn't have to. It's a part of what makes Duncan who he is, and the others finally realize that. He did, however, learn that losing your shit with someone, especially when they haven't done anything to deserve it, is completely repugnant, and from now on, Duncan will do his best to be more cheerful. An absolutely goated episode that is somehow even better than Grumpy Passenger, and a respectful way to send Duncan off the series. Davey Moore has written plenty of good episodes during his tenure, but if I had to choose a favourite, it would have to be Humbug. Like most writers, Davey also had his fair share of duds, but he'd also written some of the best CGI episodes, and both of his Duncan stories are no exception. He did, however, receive a minor role in the episode Emily Saves the World, in which he and Rheneas talk about the most exciting deliveries they'd ever had, in which the events of Runaway Elephant and Rheneas and the Dinosaur are referenced.
Yes, well, I have had some pretty exciting deliveries in my day, but the most exciting was probably a big elephant statue.
Really? Well, once I had to deliver a great big dinosaur skeleton.
His last ever appearance with a speaking role occurred in season 20's Engine of the Future.
Was that an engine?
I don't know. Maybe some kind of plane without wings.
He was, however, meant to appear one final time in season 24's The Great Little Railway Show. He ended up not making it into the final episode because that would have required Tom Staunton to come to the studio only to record a single line of dialogue, and henceforth writer Michael White was forced to axe him. Plus, he wouldn't have contributed anything of note to the episode anyway. There are two characters who immediately come to mind when thinking about relatable Thomas characters. Those, of course, are Cranky and Henry. And yes, there is no doubt that both of them are very relatable. Everything just always seems to go wrong, and they both are almost never able to fully catch a break. Duncan too is one of the most relatable characters, and yet no one seems to mention him. He wants to do things his own way without anyone interfering. He wants to get his jobs done quickly without fuss. He's competitive and prone to blast his own trumpet, but yet he's still sympathetic because he doesn't have any malicious intent. Duncan isn't just a repulsive asshole all the time. Sure, he doesn't always think about the consequences his actions might have, but he never means any harm. Plus, whenever he's in the wrong, he feels guilty and is genuinely apologetic. I, as a fellow Aspie, can see so many similar traits which makes him very relatable to me. He speaks his own mind and doesn't care about what other people think. He's honest and admits when he's in the wrong. He has social and behavior issues which results into him being misunderstood quite often. He wants to do things his own way without interference. And also, he grumbles a lot and is easily irritated. Do I personally think that Duncan may be autistic? Yes, possibly. The only confirmed autistic character we have is Theo, and other characters who show striking similarities are Duck, Fergus, and Murdoch. Duncan is such an entertaining character, and he'd had plenty of episodes that could be chosen as the best of the season. Season 5 had Duncan Get Spooked, which is a legendary episode that uses the concept of ambiguity to the fullest. Plenty of people will have this one near the top of Season 5. Season 6 had 2 episodes that could be chosen as the best of the season. Both Faulty Whistles and Duncan are incredibly entertaining and deserve to be ranked high up. Season 7's The Runaway Elephant is an exciting, fast-paced runaway adventure with great music from both dubs and great narrations from both Michaels. Season 9 has Duncan and the Old Mine, which is another fun Duncan adventure story. Season 10 has Duncan's Bluff, which is an entertaining pissing contest between 2 competitive airheads. Season 11 has the absolutely amazing Cool Truckings, which is an awesome episode about an unusual one-off pairing featuring a unique concept that is executed flawlessly. And even the CGI series provided us with 2 fantastic episodes. Both Humbug and Grumpy Passenger are absolutely amazing for being true to Duncan's character without flanderizing him. Both are immaculate S-tier episodes and one of the best of the entire series in general. So many Duncan episodes across the entire run of the series aren't just great, but easily one of the most goated episodes of the entire franchise. It is abundantly clear to me that Duncan was the show crew's favourite narrow gauge character, since they always tended to go all out with his stories. There are so many awesome characters to be found in Thomas and Friends, and picking only one as a favourite is a task that is pretty much impossible. The 3 railway engines are absolute peak. James is also pretty high up. Daisy, Diesel and Salty are my favourite Diesel characters. Cranky is my favourite non-rail character, and even some of the CGI exclusive characters rank pretty high for me, especially Steven. But if I had to pick one character who I prefer over everyone else, Duncan has a pretty good chance to be chosen. He's always guaranteed to be entertaining, relatable, but also likable and redeemable despite his stubbornness. Duncan is easily one of the most goated characters in the entire Thomas franchise, and I find it blasphemous that still to this day he doesn't receive the love he deserves, and therefore I felt the need to finally remedy that. One thing is for sure though, Duncan is definitely my favourite narrow gauge engine. There are other narrow gauge characters who I particularly love, namely Duke, Peter Sam and Scar Loey. I am also quite fond of Luke, Victor and Millie, but Duncan easily trumps them all. He can be a bit much at times, but everyone still loves him in the end, because they all know that he isn't trying to be maliciously harmful. He is the most developed Scallowy engine of the show by far, and his subtle character growth over the course of the series isn't just impressive for a narrow gauge engine, but in general. He, along with characters such as Cranky, Daisy and Steven, has had experienced wonderful steady character growth that spans spanned many seasons and is really appreciated in retrospect. From a selfish grump who thought he'd know it all, to a reckless risk taker who's always seeking adventure, to someone who's done with everything and everyone, Duncan truly had a completely unique character journey unlike anyone else, and that should absolutely get more recognition by the fandom. I love Duncan, and I hope that thanks to this video, you will too. Hey guys, it's Zach here. Thank you all so much for watching this huge behemoth of a video. While it was quite fun to do a character study again, it also took quite a lot of work to write the script, but I'm so glad to finally be done with it. Whether you watched the video live during the premiere or afterwards, I truly appreciate you for sticking around until the end. Duncan truly is an important character to me, and I wanted to do him justice. I think it's safe to say that this is my favorite video thus far, and I really hope you enjoyed it too. My next video will hopefully be the 500 subscriber special, though I'm not 100% sure about the video after, but perhaps it will be the one about 10 underappreciated characters, since plenty of you seem to like the idea. I would also like to use the opportunity to remind you to leave your vote for 2 massive videos that I may tackle in the future. Once we've reached a grand total of 200 votes, I'll make a decision. Your input will decide if those projects will become reality one day. Merry winter holidays, everybody. Thank you for your kindness and your loyalty. I truly appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll all get together to celebrate the Railway Series' 80th anniversary. See you all in 2025.